Good evening, and thank you everyone for coming out and letting the weather come back for just a few moments so you can get here dry. It's not the case this afternoon. A couple of quick announcements before I introduce our speakers. The first of all, after the talk tonight, even Derek talk, it gets dull for a while. There's books on sale in the back. It shouldn't be dull, but it's after Derek is any evidence. Mr. Pearce's books will be for sale in the back, and then after the lecture, behind, he'll be in the back signing books, and if you'd like to meet him, then also be a good chance to do that. I'd also like to take this time to thank all of our co-sponsors, Political Science, Philosophy, English, Campus Ministries, and the Dean for International Multicultural Education. This event is being sponsored by the St. Benedict Forum for Catholic Thought, Culture, and Evangelization. The St. Benedict Forum is an outreach of the St. Francis de Sales Catholic Church here in Holland. The goal of the St. Benedict Forum is to share the intellectual, cultural, and spiritual riches of the Catholic tradition of Hope College and the wider community. And very glad to see some of the wider community coming out here. We exist to provide intellectual and spiritual formation for the students at Hope College. We're very pleased to be able to bring Joseph Pearce here for our first event this year. Mr. Pearce will be telling you all about his life in a moment, but let me tell you about some of his more recent achievements. Mr. Pearce is a prolific author. He's authored more than 20 books on G.K. Chesterton, C.S. Lewis, Hilaire Belloc, J.R.R. Tolkien, Shakespeare, and others. His lovely book on literary converts, 20th century literary giants converted to Catholicism and sometimes to the Anglican Church. His newest book is called Beauty is Truth, Faith, Reason, Literature, and Culture. In short, Mr. Pearce has a book on most anything interesting. He's also the editor of the Ignatius Press Critical Editions. These are editions of classic texts with very solid commentary and fantastic essays in the back. These editions are well worth reading, especially the one where I have an essay in the back. Anyway, he's also the editor of the St. Austin Review, a journal of Catholic culture, literature, and ideas. Mr. Pearce is currently the director of the Center for Faith and Culture, and also the writer-in-residence at Aquinas College in Nashville, Tennessee. This evening, Mr. Pearce will give his testimony, Race with the Devil, My Journey from Racial Hatred to Rational Love. Please join me in welcoming Joseph Pearce.
Well, thank you for coming. Is this okay? Can you hear me? Is it loud enough? Too loud? Is it fine? Good. Okay. Well, I'd like to thank Dr. Ortiz for giving me an excellent idea, which I'm going to use for each talk that I give. When I start becoming dull, which I found it quite doing regularly, you all have to get up and go over to the book table and buy a book. So at some stage in my talk, I'm going to start speaking in monotone like this. At that point, you will all either go to sleep or not buy a book. So go and buy a book. But seriously, and this is a very serious topic, my talk this evening is about my own conversion, my own testimony from being a neo-Nazi white supremacist to becoming a member of the Catholic Church. So the title you would have seen is Race with the Devil, my journey from racial hatred to rational love. And as I became a US citizen a few years ago, it's now compulsory to punctuate my talk with commercial breaks. That was the first commercial break. The title of the talk, by some strange miraculous listeners, is identical to the title of my book. Race with the Devil, My Journey from Racial Hatred to Rational Love. Now, when I was in the process of being instructed to be received into the Catholic Church back in the late 1980s, the priest asked me to write a paper. Now, it's very unusual as a procedure of the instruction process to be asked to write a paper. priest just hated me. But the reason he asked was because he knew I was a writer. In my past life, I'd edited 2 magazines, one of which had led me to being sent to prison, which is more about later. So you know I was a writer, so it seemed an appropriate thing for me to do at least. So the theme was why I want to become a Catholic. So now I find myself in this position, which I know you've all found yourselves in. These students, and those who are either students now or have been students, which I'm sure it's most of you, sitting, looking at a blank piece of paper, or these days a blank screen, and waiting for that first sentence to come. So where's the first sentence is the hardest. Once you get going, it's easier. And then, by a gift from God, as I see it, some lines of a very, very well-known hymn entered my mind, which seemed perfect as the epigraph with which to begin my paper. I'm not going to sing the hymn. That's the good news. The bad news is you will be getting to hear my singing later in the talk. But the hymn was Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, and now I see. And those 4 lines seem absolutely appropriate, not just because of what they've said, what they say, but the fact, of course, they were written by John Newton, who was a slave trader. In my past, with the White Supremacist organisation, seems singularly appropriate, so I began with that. Because what we're going to see, as I tell this story, is not just a case, but many cases of amazing grace entering my life. So I was raised in a secular culture and in a secular family. It might be in my youth, it might be. Somewhere. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So my family was sort of nominally Anglican. Polite families in England have their children christened. So I was baptised as an infant into the Anglican Church, Church of England. But that was it. I mean, my family never went to church. We never prayed. The only time we went to church at all was for weddings. We weren't allowed, as children, we weren't allowed to go to funerals. My funerals left us at home. So weddings, the only time I ever went to church. No prayer life whatsoever. And then my school, and one of the reasons I'm very passionate about good, solid Christian education is I know how dangerous and bad a secular, relativist education is. I know that because I was the victim of it. My school, my high school back in England, in the East End of London, back in the 1970s, appalling standard of education. It was summed up by the motto of the school. And imagine, not that dissimilar from this, an auditorium, a stage, a backdrop, and the school's motto. And the school's motto was, "This, above all, to thine own self be true." William Shakespeare. Now, my father always raised me to revere William Shakespeare, the greatest Englishman who ever lived. So, well, William Shakespeare said that, I've got to take it seriously. I thought, if nothing else from this school I'm going to, I can take that motto and have it as my own personal motto for the rest of my life. This above all, to thine own self be true. And following that motto got me into all sorts of trouble, as you will see. Because, of course, it's fundamentally selfish. It's fundamentally relativist. Above all else, the only thing that matters is what you think is true. Nothing else matters. So, was my father wrong to revere William Shakespeare? Is William Shakespeare an idiot? Well, my school were idiots. Because what they didn't realise, apparently, was that William Shakespeare never said that. William Shakespeare wrote that. But Polonius And that famous line comes from a famous speech that Polonius gives to his son. His son Laertes is just about to go off to college, to go to Paris, to go to college, and the father, being a good father, says, well, this would be an appropriate time to give my son a pep talk, the facts of life, the important things in life. So he tells him what he needs to know before he goes to college. Wear the right clothes, pick the right arguments, know when to be quiet, know when to speak up, don't lend anybody any money, don't borrow any money. And this above all, to thine own self be true, treat yourself. And if you follow this, you can't go wrong. Well, by the end of the play, following this philosophy of relativism, Polonius, who is not liked, Hamlet despises him, he's the spy master. Polonius gets himself killed, spying on Hamlet. Laertes, following his father's philosophy, comes back and pursuing his passions and his prejudices instead of objective reason, becomes a dupe of the wicked King Claudius and gets himself killed and kills Hamlet in the process. And Polonius' daughter, Ophelia, is forced against her will to spy on her beloved, Hamlet. Hamlet knows that she's spying on him. He gets angry with her. Get me to a nunnery, he says. And she is driven mad by being forced by her father to spy on her beloved, and apparently commits suicide. So what does Shakespeare tell us about that motto? He says that relativism leads to the culture of death. It's deadly, suicidal, treacherous. And my school has it up there as its motto. Not said by Polonius, but said by Shakespeare, out of context. Because my school embraced wholeheartedly the creed of relativism. So I embraced wholeheartedly the creed of relativism. I would go through life and be true to myself. So I became a neo-Nazi. Now, from a Christian perspective, I should be condemned. From just about any rational perspective, I could and should be condemned. But from the perspective of being true to myself, no one has the right to condemn me. Because I was being true to myself, and of course, isn't that what matters? You have your truth, I have my truth. So I joined an organisation called the National Front. White supremacist organisation in England, which was very popular with lots of votes in the 1970s. Which is when I joined it. Joined at the age of 15. Very young. Amongst the policies of the National Front, and I remember this basically word for word from the party's manifesto, was the compulsory repatriation of all non-whites to their lands of ethnic origin. Let's unpack that a little bit. Not voluntary repatriation of immigrants. Compulsory repatriation of all non-whites to their lands of ethnic origin. In other words, if your grandmother was from Jamaica, and you're third generation over here, you would be sent back against your will to Jamaica. So that England would become an all-white country. No black faces to be seen. So I became very heavily involved in this organisation. Part of the NS policies, National Front's policies, was also staunch opposition to the IRA. Now, many of you are too young to remember the troubles in Northern Ireland that began in the late 1960s and ended in the late 1990s. In that 30-year period, nearly 4,000 people were killed in Northern Ireland, out of a population of 1.5 million. Now, I'm not very good at math, so some of you are better, but the population of the United States is about 300 million, is that about right? So you'd have to multiply the population of Northern Ireland by a racist, was very, very anti-IRA, very, very anti-Catholic. But let me say one thing about Northern Ireland. The so-called war between the Catholics and the Protestants over there was tribal, not religious. And the best way I can explain it is by telling you a joke. Sometimes some of the best truths are told in jokes. So there's this, it's the middle of the troubles of Northern Ireland. In 1978, shall we say. And there's this American. Why not? Get American into it. An American is in Belfast, the capital of Northern Ireland, the height of the troubles. And he's in the city centre, which is fairly safe unless a bomb goes off. Otherwise, fairly safe. But he wanders off. All of a sudden finds himself lost in a somewhat threatening part of the city, which is most of it. And doesn't really know where he is, and he thought, this is not a good place to be. And then his worst fears begin to come true. Because out of the shadows, this ominous and menacing group of young men approach him. So they come up to him and they ask him, are you a Protestant or a Catholic? He doesn't know what part of town he's in. And he's thinking, this is a dangerous question. It's like Russian roulette. I give the wrong answer, I'm dead. So he thinks quickly. He says, you know, I'm an atheist. Thinking how clever he is and how smart. It seems to work because these thugs look at each other and scratch their heads. And then look at him and says, yes, but are you a Protestant atheist or a Catholic? Now the point is that's true, because here am I. I'm a neo-Nazi. I'm a racist. I hate Catholics. But am I a Protestant? Well, tribally, yes, but only because I hate Catholics. I don't go to church, I don't read the Bible, I don't pray, and does God exist? Well, I'm not an atheist, because I don't care. I don't care whether God exists or not. He's irrelevant to me. I'm a Protestant agnostic. An anti-Catholic agnostic. So at the age of 17, in October 1978, I make my first visit to Northern Ireland, become involved in a huge riot in London, Benedict, the second largest city in Northern Ireland. Shops are looted and burned to the ground. The Catholic enclave in that Protestant part of the city was attacked. I was involved in that. There's not time to give all these gory details. Beautiful. Great. I also joined an organisation called the Orange Order. And the Orange Order is a secret society that exists only to hate Catholics. And theoretically it's a Protestant organisation. But I was in it, neo-Nazi, but I was a Protestant neo-Nazi, so that's okay. Protestant agnostics, that's okay. And a friend of mine who was an atheist, an avowed militant atheist, and he was also in the lodge because he also hated Catholics. And he and I, when they were reading from Scripture, it was every lodge meeting, they read from Scripture, he and I would smirk at each other surreptitiously across the lodge room while we were reading this Christian rubbish. I always try to impart some useful practical information during my talks. So just if anybody wants to leave here with some practical knowledge that might be useful, I know it must come in helpful here in this particular part of Michigan. If any of you want to know the secret handshake of the Orange Order, I will let me show you the secret handshake of the Orange Order. So next time you meet an orange man, which must happen all the time, you can shake his hand and get at home with him, okay? Still remember the secret handshake. But I was also heavily involved in the loyalist terrorist organisations in Northern Ireland, the UDA, the Ulster Defence Association, and the UVF, the Ulster Volunteer Force. One of the burdens I carry is not knowing whether my involvement in those groups led to anybody being killed or otherwise seriously hurt. Once in Northern Ireland, I was in a loyalist Protestant drinking club, just north of Belfast, a place called Blackpool. The terrorist organisations in made their money from money they needed to smuggle guns and explosives in to keep up the terrorist war. They raised money by robbing banks and by opening up drinking clubs, and all the profits of which went to the organisation. So this was the UVF drinking club, Ulster Volunteer Force, an radical terrorist group. And I'm in there having a drink, listening to the band, sing anti-Catholic songs, and generally having a wonderful time. And then I get a tap on the shoulder, and I'm told that someone wants to see me outside. Now, when you're in a terrorist club, that's not what you want to hear. So I sort of see my life flash before me. And I thought, what have I done? What have I upset? You know, have I made eyes at the local godfather's daughter or something, and not know anything about them? I'm in big trouble here. So I go outside, I didn't have any choice, and there are 3 men waiting there, which is bad news. Because a terrorist cell is normally made up of 3 men. 4 is bad for security, 2 doesn't work so well, 3, magic number. So, the spokesman of this group, I'm guessing, I was probably about 18, I'm guessing they're only a year or 2 older, 19 or 20. But the leader of this group came up to me, and he said that they were disillusioned with the leadership of the UVF, because they were too soft. This is a pathological organisation of killers, but they were too soft. So what this terrorist group wanted to do was to effect and to become the terrorist wing of the Young National Front, of which I was the leader, the chairman. And they wanted to put themselves under my direct leadership, and they would take out, use their terminology, kill anybody who wanted killed. Okay, so I thought, right. So I was never pathological enough to actually want to kill anybody, or to have anybody killed. But I wasn't also suicidal enough to tell them that. So I thought, how do I handle this? So I basically said, that's great. And he said, well, we'll show you our arsenal of weapons, so you know that we're in earnest. I said, no, I believe you. You have to show me. No problem. I said, this is good. Really need to do something about this. I'm going to get back to you. And of course, when I was safely on the other side of the Irish Sea in England, did not get back to it. Within a year, the leader of that group, one doing the talking, was arrested and sentenced to life in prison for shooting dead the mother of an IRA man on her doorstep. Now, I don't think he was aiming to shoot the mother. I think he was probably in a staunch IRA area of town. He was probably scared, and he shot whoever answered the door. It wasn't the IRA man, it was his mother. And if that wasn't bad enough, my racism and my involvement with the loyalist terrorists in Northern Ireland, was also involved with the neo-fascist terrorists in Europe. There was an organisation, an Italian fascist organisation called Terza Posizione, third position, who were alleged to have been responsible for the bombing of Bologna railway station in the north of Italy, where over 150 people were killed. And the leaders of that organisation fled the country, smuggled themselves across Europe, and landed in England, and we supplied safe houses for them. I became friends with the leader of that group, someone called Roberto Fiore. Incidentally, by the way, he is now a member of the European Parliament. He's had some sort of conversion experience. He's now a practicing Catholic. He was a pagan when I knew him. He's married, has children, does a lot of pro-life stuff. I'm not sure what his other policies are. I don't want to necessarily endorse him, but he's come a long way too, thanks be to God. And personally, I don't think he or his group were responsible for that bomb. But I don't know, and the reason I don't know is because if you actually get involved in terrorism, the first thing you know is the need to know principle. If you don't need to know it, don't ask. There's a very simple reason for that. It protects you. Because if you don't know anything, you're safe. Also, of course, protects the terrorists. Because the fewer people know what they're doing, the better. So I don't know. The other thing I'm very skinhead music. The skinhead movement was on the rise in the late, about 1980, 1981. It was a reaction against the punks. In those days, the sort of youth cults were very politicized. And a lot of punk rockers were nihilists and anarchists. So a lot of punk rockers who were racists and Nazis shaved their head off and ceased to be punks and became skinheads. Now, very heavily involved in the skinhead music scene. Music is the right word. I founded a record label called White Noise Records. Perfect name, it was white and it was noise. And we had various bands, we used to put on concerts. And on the first single we produced on that record label was a single called White Power by a band called Screwdriver. Screwdriver spelled with a K, skinhead. And if any of you read that and have any of that element of morbid curiosity in this day and age, just put Screwdriver into your YouTube search and you'll see all sorts of horrible stuff come up. But anyway, I was asked to be guest vocalist. Is that grown? Hey, grown over there? I was asked to be guest vocalist on White Power by Screwdriver. And my part in it was in the chorus. It was this. White Power! That was it. And after all this time, 30 years, I still remember the words. It's amazing. On the B-side, in those days there were records, you had A-sides and B-sides. And the other side was a song called Smash the IRA. And I was guest vocalist on that as well. My part in that was Smash! Smash! I think I missed my vocation. I'm a rock singer. Now again, if you're more curiosity, you put White House Screwdriver, you can even hear my dulcet tones in the background. And you must think now, surely there was something about this man that was lovely. Actually, not here, that's all. Nothing about this man. Well, you should know, I was also very anti-American. I was involved in anti-American demonstrations outside US air bases, Yanks go home placards. And I wasn't involved personally because I was too busy, to be honest with you, getting drunk on whiskey because it was a very cold night outside US air base in Suffolk. But some of our members were fighting with members of the US Air Force in the local pub. So I was very anti-American. A long way from where I am now, very pro-American, And in the midst of all this, I edited a magazine of the Young National Front, called Bulldog. And for editing Bulldog, I was charged back in 1981, I was 20 years old, with publishing material likely to incite racial hatred. I was sentenced to 6 months in prison. And I spent my 21st birthday in prison. And I was such a fanatic that as they dragged me off to the cells, I was screaming at the judge that he'd face his judgment. And I considered myself a political prisoner, and I used my cell as a gym, using my bed as bench press to get myself in shape so I'd come out and be a more radical political soldier than I was when I went in. So I came out, and I continued to edit Bulldog. But I didn't want to go back to prison again. So Bulldog was now edited by a superhero called Captain Truth. And his picture was on the editorial page. Huge 4-foot chest with a great T on it, and a mask. Captain Truth was the editor. Now the British police force are not the smartest people in the world. But they began to suspect that perhaps Captain Truth didn't really exist. And therefore, perhaps somebody else might be the editor. However, there was a huge difference between the two prison sentences. First prison sentence, I was a fanatic, a revolutionary, a political prisoner as I saw it, a political soldier, is the terminology. Now here I am, beginning of a 12-month prison sentence, thinking, why am I here? I don't even believe the stuff that I've been sent to prison for. It's a much more difficult situation to deal with. And during the, well, so I suppose the next question is, what on earth changed? And how did it change? What happened between those two prison sentences? Well, I wasn't interested at all in religion. It would never get me to read a book on Christianity in a million years. And I was interested in politics, obviously. And we used to have demonstrations on the streets that turned violent with the communists. And they would throw bricks and stones and would fight. And they would also throw verbal abuse. And one of the things they would say is, you are just stormtroopers of capitalism. Now, my attitude was, I may despise communism, but that doesn't mean that I want the world run by Bill Gates. He wasn't around then, but whoever the 1980s equivalent of Bill Gates was. I don't want the world being run by unelected, anonymous, multinational corporations and international financiers and global corporations and etc. And I refused to accept that communism was the only alternative to this global plutocracy, plutocratic globalism, whatever you want to call it. So I was interested in alternatives to that. And someone said, well, have you looked at the distributist ideas of G.K. Chesterton? No, you see. But I said, you need to read one essay by Chesterton. And it's in a book called The Well and the Shallows. Sure, okay. So I got this book. And the essay was 2/3 of the way through the book. But the rest of the book was a defense of the Catholic Church. But I hate it. But I read it. Well, you know, if one essay is worth it, let's start from page 1 and see what this man Chesterton has to say. And I'm certainly not saying I was converted overnight. I wasn't, by any means. Not for some time. But I couldn't help liking Chesterton. Couldn't help liking his sense of humour, the way he discussed things. There's something about Chesterton that you feel as if you're in the room with him. It almost becomes a friend. So I wanted to read more Chesterton. And this was, of course, the beginning of Dangerous Things. Now, C.S. Lewis says in his book, Surprised by Joy, a sound atheist cannot be too careful of his reading. And a sound racist cannot be too careful of his reading either. And then, so I'm looking for my books on Chesterton. Chesterton was out of fashion at the time. You could pick up Chesterton books for 20 pence. So I'm trawling through this second-hand bookshop in London, looking for some Chesterton. And my eyes come across this book on the shelf. It seems to be calling me. Surprised by Joy by C.S. Lewis. I'd heard of C.S. Lewis, but I'd never read any C.S. Lewis, didn't know much about him. Probably had heard a line of which he called it was a children's book, but never read it. Who was he? But something prompted me to take that book from the shelf. And I used to think there was an index in that book. I used to look up the word Chesterton and open it, that page, but someone pointed out to me quite correctly there is no index. I'm surprised by Joy. That makes it even more marvellous. Because what I obviously did, took this book off by this unknown writer, sort of called to me from the shelf, opened it at random, saw the magic word, Chesterton. Oh, Lewis. I know about Chesterton. And he only mentions Chesterton twice in the book, so you know, the chances were slim. And it was the first meeting, not meeting personally, the first time Lewis had ever read Chesterton. It was during World War I. C.S. Lewis is in the trenches in the British Army. And he comes across this book of Chesterton essays. And he's an atheist. picks up Chesterton. And what he writes about Chesterton, first reading Chesterton, you know, he couldn't help liking him, loved the sense of humour, and Chesterton had more, he wrote, Chesterton had more common sense than all the moderns put together. Except, of course, his Christianity. Right? Yes! That's it! I agree with this C.S. Lewis chap. Chesterton's great except his Christianity. So I'm crucified by joy. Which is, of course, C.S. Lewis's conversion story. And I read it. So, from Chesterton to Lewis, Hilaire Belloc, John Henry Newman, others I could mention, I do mention in the book. I read The Lord of the Rings for the first time during that second prison sentence. It's a book I've been reading for ages. It's thick. How thick that is. Yeah, later. I had more time. Well, 12 months of solitary confinement. I don't say it's time now. Perfect time to read all of this. Of course, another major milestone in my move towards conversion. So in that second prison sentence, on the second day of that second prison sentence, the prospect of 12 months in prison ahead of me, sitting alone in my cell, Roman Scrubs prison in London, found myself holding some rosary beads. Actually, I have some here, so let's take them out for dramatic effect. Some rosary beads, not this particular set. And I was holding them. And I don't even remember now actually how I got them. Someone must have given them to me because it couldn't have happened scenting because it was the second day of the sentence. I knew what those beads were because my father, who hated Catholicism, used to call Catholics bead rattlers, which is terrible abuse. Those bead rattlers. And he came home from the pub one night when I was a child. And my mother's grandmother, was Irish. And she never went to Mass, never practiced her faith, as far as I know. But when she died, my mother took her rosary beads. And my mother had no idea how to say the rosary, nor any inclination to want to. It was merely a keepsake, a memento of her own mother. My father came home from the pub and said, "We might have those papist beads in the house," and threw them out of the window. Here I am, holding these papist beads in my hand. And I could throw them out the window because the prison cell had a window that opened. It had bars, you couldn't climb out of it, but it had windows that opened. But I had no intention of throwing them away, no desire to throw them away. I should say also, by the way, that as involved in the Loyalists of Northern Ireland, there was a song, thinking, oh my God, you must sing it. There's a Loyalist song, rather ironically, perversely perhaps, to the tune of Home on the Range. That's a strange world we live in. And it went like this. No, no Pope of Rome, no chapels to sadden my eyes, no nuns and no priests, no rosary beads. Every day is the 12th of July. 12th of July is a Protestant thing in Northern Ireland to celebrate the victory of Protestants against the Catholics 300 years ago. But no nuns and no priests, no rosary beads. And here I am. But I wanted to say the rosary. If you want to throw it away, I want to say it. Never prayed in my life. But there's a problem. Because I didn't know the creed. I didn't know the Hail Mary. I didn't know the Glory Be. And I had been taught the Our Father when I was about that high. And I've long since forgotten it. So how do I say the rosary? Pray the rosary. With great difficulty. But what I did was I fumbled the beads and mumbled inarticulate prayers. And what began to happen was miraculous. Answers started to flood in. Healing started to flood in. I began to go to Mass for the first time in prison. When I got out of prison, I knew I had to make a clean break from my past. I'm now 25. I've been involved in politics since I was 15. So I left received in the Catholic Church. Oh, you must be going to Bible. Received in the Catholic Church in 1989, on St. Joseph's Day 1989. And you would have gathered already that I'm not one who's lost for words. Lost for singing to us, maybe, but not lost for words. And I was armed. I didn't know the priest secretly had arranged for the ladies of the parish to bake a cake and have a sort of party after the Mass. And I wanted to say a speech, make a speech. The first, so far, openly time in my life, I was speechless. And what could I say? All that I could say was, I've come home. And quite frankly, that's all I can say now. It's about the enormity of what had happened. I've come home. Said one thing as well, postscript now, the conversion. My father, who's a major part of the book, was received into the Catholic Church about 10 years before he died. And that to me is an even larger miracle. And the last thing he and I did together, before he died, on his deathbed, was to pray the rosary. And I was so blessed, because I happened, I didn't think over here by then, I was so blessed because I happened to be in England, in Cambridge, for a C.S. Lewis conference. 60 miles from where my father was rushed into hospital. Hour and a half's drive. What a blessing. And I would have to cancel my talk. The sales of the precinct, this is great. I had to cancel my talk because my father was dying. And I had, I don't know how many people were there, 300 or 400 faithful Christians, lovers of C.S. Lewis, praying for my father. And what a holy death he had. What holy help he had. Right, so then my life after my conversion, I decided to write a book. But I was notorious in England. I should say my prison sentences made front page headlines. You couldn't drive the freeways in England during my prison sentences for any more than 5 miles without seeing Free Joe Pearce written above the freeway. I got, anyway, I can't talk about it anyway. It was notorious. So I thought I can't possibly, no one's going to publish a book in my name. So I'm going to have to use a nom de plume, a pseudonym. So I decided to name Robert Williamson. And why is that? Well, it's another song. Sorry. Because it's a loyalist song about an orange man who becomes a Catholic. Here am I, an orange man who becomes a Catholic. And it's like this. In the county Tyrone, near the town of Dungannon, where many's a rush and myself had a Hannah. Bob Williamson lived there, a weaver by trade, and all of us thought him a stout orange blade. But the cunning young Crew boy sure took us all in, and he married a papish called Bridget Begin. Turned papish himself and forsook the old cause that gave us our freedom, religion and laws. Now the boys of the town, they make some noise upon it, and Bob had to fly in the province of Connaught. So it goes on. Bob Williamson, the orange man who marries a papist for Bridget Begin in the county Tyrone, in the town of Dungannon, becomes a Catholic. Well, I didn't marry Bridget Begin, but I was the orange man becoming Catholic. So I was Robert Williamson. That was the name I was going to use. My first book, after I became a Catholic, was the biography of Chesterton. And that book, I always say, was an act of thanksgiving. An act of thanksgiving to Chesterton for giving me God. An act of thanksgiving to God for giving me Chesterton. And finally, using postscripts to show that God has a sense of humour. ago, if you'd said to me I'd married an American, I'd laughed at the story. No way. And I meet this wonderful American lady from Southern California. She's sort of American. And in Oxford, in England, we fall in love, we get married. And her mother is from the county Tyrol, near the town of Dungannon. A little village called the Rock, just outside Dungannon, the county Tyrol, where my mother-in-law comes from. So after I decided to call myself Bob Williamson, God thought that's a good joke, we could do something with that. And I married Bridget McGinn's daughter. And then we move, we get married. Susanna moves to England. We're only there for 4 months, and I accept a position at Hallelujah College as it then was in the States, and we move over here in 2001. By the time we come over here, we're expecting our first child. So I said to my wife, I said, you know, we Catholics, aren't we? She looks at me suspiciously and says, yes. I said, well, that means that we believe life begins at conception, doesn't it? She says, yes. So, well, that means that our son's English, doesn't it? No, he hasn't been born yet. He said, no. So I said, well, anyway, I think we should put him George, after St. George of England. She said, no. And I said, why not? He said, well, over here it's not St. George, it's King George. And I was thinking, George Washington, and where's the problem here, you know? So anyway, that's just a good marriage, we started to compromise, and our son's called Leo. But he was going to be Leo George. I got that compliment, Leo George. And then our son has the audacity to set up a very bad precedent before he's born. Because our son is born on St. Patrick's Day. So our son is not Leo George Pearce, but Leo Patrick Pearce. And I said one of the very few occasions in human history that English was voluntarily genuflected before the Irish. I see there's further examples of God's sense of humour. And I just want to finish as I began. Amazing grace, how sweet